And now, the star of the show, Jordan Rogozinski.
Hello, folks. Welcome back to the Jordan 411 Sports Show. Today's guest started his broadcasting career with the Winnipeg Goldeyes, and now he is the voice of the Winnipeg Jets for 680 CJOB. Please welcome Paul Edmonds.
Thanks a lot, Jordan. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, you're welcome. Now, how did you get into broadcasting?
Well, it happened a long time ago. I mean, I loved playing sports, but realized at a fairly early age that I wasn't going to get to the levels that I wanted to, whether it was Major League Baseball or the NHL. So I thought, okay, well, how do I sort of stay in the game? And I also had an uncle at the time that was a sports writer for a newspaper. He started out at the Tribune. He worked his way through Western Canada, and then he ended up sort of finishing with the Winnipeg Sun, and now he just writes about curling exclusively. So he, next to my father, was probably the closest man in my life, and I kind of thought what he was doing was interesting. And so I followed that path through school, and then eventually realized that I wanted to actually do the broadcasting as opposed to the writing aspect. And so the rest, as they say, is history. But this has been a pursuit that I've traveled and been in sort of pursuit of for many, many years. In fact, many decades.
If there was one thing that you could teach an up-and-coming broadcaster like me, what would it be?
I think there's a couple things. I mean, I think you want to make sure that when you're reporting on things, first and foremost, that you're right and not necessarily first. You need to be factually correct. If you make a mistake, apologize or just keep going. Don't worry about it. You know, I mean, there's those things where we try to correct it on the air or whatever, and it ends up being just worse than it was, or you thought it was. The other thing is you're never as bad as you think you sound. So you might think that you didn't sound very good, and then you listen to it afterward and you were like, well, that doesn't sound that bad. And just so that you know, and your listeners know, I listen to myself quite often. I do what they call is an air check, and I air check myself frequently. And so from that standpoint, you've got to get used to hearing your own voice, which is kind of strange sometimes. But yeah, there's not, I think, any time where I've gone and said, oh, I had a really off night tonight. And then I listened to it back and gone, well, that wasn't that bad. So that would be some advice. And, you know, you don't have to necessarily have everything that you want right away. You've got to work your way through. I think experience speaks for itself. It allows you to be a better broadcaster and have more sort of vast experiences. And certainly anything relating to the sports that you cover will give you a better opportunity to kind of talk about those sports because you can go back on those past experiences.
Why was baseball your first sport you fell in love with when you were growing up?
I mean, for me, it's always been hockey and baseball, 1 and 1A. I think there was just, you know, the player cards in baseball, you know, the games on TV. There always seemed to be more baseball games on TV growing up than there was hockey games. And, you know, I was a hockey player too. So there was just something romantic about baseball for me as a kid. I liked the game. It was challenging. I think I was okay at it. I was never great at it. Hockey, actually, I was better at than baseball overall. I played at higher levels of hockey than I did at baseball. But you know, I got into baseball because actually it's kind of a funny story. I was doing the Regina Pats in the Western Hockey League, and the team would kind of let me go for the summer and the off season. So I needed to have some employment. So I heard from a friend one time in Lethbridge. He said, yeah, well, we've got this baseball team here and they need a radio guy. So I said, okay, well, I applied for the radio gig in Lethbridge with this baseball team with a hockey demo tape. And I ended up getting the job. So that kind of spawned my baseball career in radio and broadcasting that lasted 20 years. And then I was able to always kind of fall back on hockey as well. So it was kind of not accidental, but it was just kind of fortunate that happened. And baseball was great to me for the 20 years of my career that I pursued it. And I still enjoy the game. I've had two boys that have played high level of baseball and gone through the system. My youngest one is still in it. So we've got a few more years left with him. And I get to coach still in the off season. So that's been a lot of fun too, to kind of keep my hand in the game. And I'm still a big Gold Eyes fan for sure.
Now, in 1995, you had the opportunity to join the Winnipeg Gold Eyes. How did that opportunity come about?
Well, the Gold Eyes started or came to the city in 1994, and they won a championship that year. And at that time, there was two broadcasters. There was Peter Young and Les Lazaruk. And Les Lazaruk, they were sharing the duties. And Les ended up getting a job in Saskatoon with the Saskatoon Blades in the Western Hockey League. So he was moving. So there was an opportunity to fill his spot. And I had 1 year of broadcasting baseball in Lethbridge. So being from Winnipeg, I reached out to a few people, Sam Cates being one of them, and said, hey, listen, I'd be interested in. The questions came up about experience and where you're from and all of that. And I seemed like I ticked all the boxes. So I ended up having an interview in a restaurant, and they ended up offering me the job. And I took the job and lasted there for 19 years. So never looked back. And it was just the timing of it, I think, was probably the most fortunate part for me, but also that I had a little bit of experience. Plus, I was from town. So that made it a little bit easier, I think, for them to make a decision on hiring me.
Now we're going to go to the 2012 Winnipeg Gold Eyes team.
Okay.
What made that team so amazing to watch, particularly in the playoffs?
Well, it's always been said, and over my career with the Gold Eyes, they got to the finals in 95, 97, 99, 2001, 2002, 2003, and never won it. So I was around some really good teams that, for whatever reason, didn't get right to the end and win the championship. And the one thing about baseball in the Northern League or the American Association of Professional Baseball, you really only need to get as a team for a couple of weeks. And I just kind of felt that all throughout that experience and those other disappointments of seasons, that they just didn't peak at the right time. And this team in 2012 did. And it was almost kind of like they were not going to be denied. They had a guy by the name of Barbaro Canizares that replaced John Weber right at the end of the season. And just his impact in the batting lineup just really propelled the Gold Eyes to that championship. Plus, it was a group of players, Jordan, that had been together for a few years. And so those guys knew what it kind of all took to that point and then get over that hump. And they did it together. And that, I think, was the most unique thing about that team. Was there was a number of them that had been around for a while, had tasted some success, but never won the championship. And then after they did, a number of them retired, like Ace Walker, Zach Baldwin, Brian Boyning. There was a number of those guys that walked away. Price Kendall was another one. They just kind of said, okay, this is it. I won a championship. I'm done. And I still keep in contact through Facebook and some other social media with a lot of those guys on that team, because it had been, I think, 16 years since the Gold Eyes had won a championship. So it was a long time between titles. And like I said, those guys were well connected together. And I think that was the most special part. Not only winning, but they won it together as a group that had been together for about 3 or 4 years.
Now, Rick Forney recently left the team for another opportunity. How would you define Rick's legacy as a manager and a pitcher?
Well, I think more the legacy as a manager, because he won 3 championships, right? He won the one in 2012, and then he won back-to-back championships after I left. And so, I mean, anytime that you win championships, that's the ultimate goal when you start. Rick's legacy, I think, will be hard to match or duplicate. He was very good at putting together teams every year that were competitive and that could have won championships, and for whatever reason might not have. because, again, maybe didn't get hot at the right time. But Rick has a unique ability to communicate, to recruit, to have an eye for talent. And it was 16 years that he was the manager of the Winnipeg Goldeyes. I've known Rick since 1997 when he showed up as a pitcher, and he was very good. He didn't throw really hard. He did in his earlier career, but he had some surgeries. So he really got smart like a fox. He understood the nature of pitching and how to kind of be deceptive. So he was really good at the fastball command, but also making sure that he had other pitches to get hitters off balance. And I think that he took that into being a really good pitching coach, and then from there expanded into being an exceptional manager. It's going to be very unfortunate for the Winnipeg Goldeyes and for the baseball community here in Manitoba that he's not going to be part of it anymore. But he had a great run here in Winnipeg for all those years and decades, frankly. And now he's going to be a little bit closer to home where he wants to be. And I understood that. I'm not surprised when Rick made the announcement last week because I had known for a little while that he wanted to get closer to home. But he'll have a great legacy as a manager of the Winnipeg Goldeyes here, and a legacy that will be tough to top.
Now, how would you transition to the TSN 1290 morning show from the Winnipeg Goldeyes?
Well, they asked me at TSN 1290 if I would be interested in taking the Jets job. And of course, that was the pinnacle of your career. You're in the National Hockey League. I said, sure. And I had a bit of baseball experience, but a lot of hockey experience as well. So I wasn't really worried about transitioning from one sport to the other, because in the past I had done both in the same year. Like I would do a baseball season, then go into a hockey season, then back to a baseball season. So it wasn't that difficult. But they said, okay, we need you, but we don't need you till next year, but we want you to come into the building. Would you be interested in doing the morning show? And honestly, Jordan, I wasn't that interested in doing the morning show. But I knew that if I did it for 6 months, that at the end of it, it was only a term position, that I would be doing the Jets, and that it wasn't going to be very long. And it was kind of new in my career. So let's try it. Why not? Because I knew if it was going to fail or if I enjoyed it, either way, it was only for about 6 months, and I was going to get to do what I actually wanted to do. So that's how that all came about. And then after I did that show for 6 months, I moved on and have looked at nothing but doing the Winnipeg Jets ever since. But it was a lot of fun. I got to work with Troy Westwood and some other great people, and probably get a little bit better at the mechanics of hosting a radio show. So that made me probably a better broadcaster, to go back to your first question about maybe making some advice for young broadcasters. And that is, take any experience that you can get, use it, and then use it going forward in your career.
Speaking of the Winnipeg Jets, how do you think they're doing so far this season?
Well, I think that there was a lot of people that were kind of waiting to see how they were going to do. And I think they've maybe not surprised people, but people are encouraged by what they see, and certainly have what they have heard from the radio waves as well. I mean, at 5-3-1, going into a 3-game homestand here, playing a lot of games on the road. They've played some back-to-backs already. They've had tough opponents. I think the Winnipeg Jets have done just quite well, considering that there wasn't a lot of people that were expecting much from them after they missed the playoffs last year. So I'm encouraged by what I see. They still need to cut down the shots on goal. They're a little bit too high. Yes. But at the same time, I think that they've got a real good group that's connected, that wants to play for each other. They're talented. They've got an excellent goalie. And there's just kind of a new sort of feeling around the team. There's a different vibe around the team with the coaching staff that's new this year. And as a result, I think that there's no expectation on the team. Therefore, they probably should get back to the playoffs, and let's see what happens once they get in.
Speaking of the coaching, how do you think the team have reacted to the change of system under Rick Bowness?
I think it's been great. I think that there's still some time to learn and understand the system. And one of the biggest sort of components to that is when you're taught something new, for the first little while, you're actually having to think about the reaction of it. And once that becomes a bit more habitual, then they just react and don't think. And that's when you play faster and that's when you play quicker. It's like life. When you have to step back and think about things and not just react, then you're going to be a little bit slower. So reacting to the new system, I think, has been good. It's been positive, and it's only going to get better because the Jets won't have to process it as much because they'll just know where they need to be, where they need to go on the ice. And as a result, they'll just be a quicker team. But it's been a real good transition with the new coach and the new coaching staff.
Where is your favorite city to travel to in the National Hockey League?
Well, that has to be for weather reasons. I really enjoy going to Florida, especially when we go there in March to get out of Winnipeg, right? Because it's cold.
Yeah.
Montreal is a great place to go to, too. There's just so much history, and it's just rich with that hockey history, and they do a real good job of their game ops. The building is always full and electric, so that's a favorite of mine as well for the hockey reasons. I enjoy going to Vancouver. It's a beautiful city as well, and it's another Canadian city. But for me, one of my favorite places probably has to be Tampa because their team has always been really good. For whatever reason, the Jets have always played really well there. There's always been a real good contingent of Jets fans down in Tampa or in Sunrise where the Panthers play. And then the weather, but the building and the knowledge of the fans. And I think that you just understand there's going to be a really good game that night. So Tampa would probably be my favorite outside of a few other places. But if I had to pick one that tops the list, that would be it.
And do you have a favorite restaurant, like when you go away?
There would be when we go to Colorado and play in Denver, sometimes we try to have dinner, depending on if you're there for a night and you can do that. There's a restaurant called Elway's, and it's owned by the former quarterback of the Denver Broncos, John Elway, and it's a steak place. So it probably would be my favorite restaurant in the league that I try to get to. It's not cheap, Jordan, but they put out a pretty good steak. So I enjoy going to Elway's when I'm in Denver.
What is the hardest thing to learn when you are calling games on the radio in the National Hockey League?
I think sometimes it's the pace, the speed of the game, and the rapidness that you're talking. You have to learn the rosters so that you're not thinking, like I said, and just reacting. But I think sometimes it's some of those name pronunciations when you haven't worked that name in before. That's the toughest thing. You've got to get it just to kind of roll off your tongue at a pretty rapid speed. So that would be probably the most difficult. There is some challenges sometimes too about the broadcast location that we're in. We're not necessarily always right at center ice and just above the ice. Sometimes you're way down in the corner, and the broadcast locations for radio aren't the best. So it makes it difficult to see the other side of the rink. But those are just minor things. I just think that you need to know your rosters and you need to know the pronunciations. And those are the biggest challenges and the thing that I look for the most in making sure that I'm the most prepared at.
What has been your favorite moment as the radio voice of the Winnipeg Jets so far?
I was probably, that playoff run of 17-18 was great. They got to the Western Conference Final. But probably the biggest moment for me would be when I was in Pittsburgh and I got to call Sidney Crosby's 1,000th point of his National Hockey League career. It happened in like the first 3 minutes. I just remember saying to myself, okay, let's hope he gets it because he's probably going to get it against the Jets. Let's hope he gets it early and don't blow the call. Don't blow the call, Paul. Just make sure you have a good call on it. And I did. I don't know. It's somewhere trapped in some computer, I guess. But I just remember I can say to you, honestly, I had a good call on it. And it was a big moment for me because I'm a big Sidney Crosby fan as a player and as a person. And so to watch his 1,000th point and be able to call it in Pittsburgh was pretty special.
How do you prepare to call a game on the radio in the National Hockey League?
Yeah, well, there's usually a few hours that go into that. I usually get my roster together. That's both teams, so that you can study the numbers and the names. And then, so I get that together and I put a little bit of a note beside each player: heights, weights, their age, goals, maybe what game it is for them. And then I also do a score sheet as well that has some other pertinent information that I might want to pass along on the air. So, all in all, probably there's at least 3 to 4 hours of preparation going into each broadcast. Plus, there's other things that I have to do. I do a daily podcast on the day of the games. I have to do some social media responsibilities. There's interviews. So, there's all kinds of things. But yeah, there's about 3 or 4 solid hours of preparation going into each game. And you do that 82 times a year plus preseason, which would be 88. And then hopefully you get to the postseason. And then the preparation becomes a little easier because you're seeing the same team possibly for 7 straight games, right? But yeah, there's a lot of work that goes into it for sure.
And can I please get a showtime from downtown Winnipeg?
Puck is dropped in center, and it's showtime from downtown.
It cut out a bit.
Oh, you want me to do it again?
Yeah, do it again.
Okay. Teams come to center ice, and the puck is dropped, and it's showtime from downtown Winnipeg.
That's cool. What are your memories traveling with the Gold Eyes to Amarillo, Texas?
Well, that was a long trip. That whole trip that time would have been in 2011 was the first time we went down there. And I remember we had a couple of home games here, exhibition. Then we had a home game, an exhibition game in Fargo. Then we played another one in like Sioux City. Then we went to Wichita. And then the next game was in Amarillo where we started the season. So we kind of worked our way down. And that was great. But it was Amarillo to Laredo was like 11 hours. And then Laredo to El Paso was another 11-hour trip. And then after we finished there, we ended up driving I think it was about 26 straight hours home. And I ate out of a window, drive-through window 4 times on that trip coming home that lasted 26 hours. So, yeah, I mean, were they great memories? Yeah, sure, I guess. I mean, it was an awesome experience. Would I ever really want to do that again? Probably not.
Well, thank you, Paul. It was awesome to get to know your knowledge and your little tips and tricks and to learn your opinion on the Jets so far. And thank you for coming on the show.
Jordan, thanks very much for having me. Anytime. We'll do this again soon.
Yeah.